Even after the most recent batch of documents was made public earlier this month, what we've seen still represents only a sliver of the full story surrounding the life and alleged crimes of financier Jeffrey Epstein. Yet even from these scattered fragments, you've probably noticed the same unsettling pattern. A growing web of connections linking him to an alarming number of prominent and powerful figures. Which naturally leads to a straightforward question. How did Epstein manage to cultivate so many relationships and gain influence over so many people? He wasn't born into extraordinary wealth or prestige. He didn't inherit a dynasty or a powerful family name. And based on the limited information that has been made available, much of his early business success appears to have been facilitated by individuals and institutions that ordinary people would never even have access to, let alone be considered by. Almost like a dark twist on Forrest Gump, he seemed to appear again and again at pivotal moments over the past 4 decades, hovering around major names, major industries, major events, with at least some degree of involvement in all the wrong places. If his connections had been limited to other elite financiers, perhaps this could be dismissed as the natural byproduct of operating within a tightly connected professional circle. But we now know his close personal associations stretch far beyond finance. They included politicians, spiritual leaders, banking executives, members of European nobility, Hollywood power players, and not just one of the world's richest men, but several of them. These relationships crossed national borders, political affiliations, industries, and even rival factions. People who publicly opposed one another still appeared within the same broader social orbit. If we were being purely pragmatic about it, there may even be something to learn from how tightly these circles support and shield one another. Lessons that could apply to our own careers and social networks. Just, ideally without the criminal behavior. Setting aside all of that, the sheer scale and diversity of Epstein's network would be remarkable on its own, especially in a time when many ordinary people report having fewer close friendships and meaningful connections than ever before. I don't know about you, but once you hit your 30s, maintaining even a small handful of friendships can start to feel like a logistical challenge. And yet here was someone embedded in a web of global elites. That contrast becomes even more striking when you remember that he didn't exactly begin with a spotless reputation. These were supposedly some of the busiest, most time-constrained individuals on the planet, heads of state, corporate executives, public figures constantly in motion, and yet somehow they seemed to find time for social events and private gatherings where Epstein was occasionally in attendance. Or so the story goes, which raises a larger question. Was this extraordinary network something uniquely tied to his alleged criminal enterprise? Or is this level of interconnectedness simply standard practice once you pass a certain threshold of wealth and influence? The answer may seem obvious. It's a big club, and you're not in it. But what exactly was this club? And is it truly gone? Or has it simply evolved? And before we move forward, I suppose I should address the obvious. Yes, my name appeared in the Epstein files. We'll get to that. Now, statistically speaking, the most reliable way to build a vast network of wealthy and powerful contacts is to be born into wealth and power yourself. In that respect, Epstein did not start with those built-in advantages. He grew up in a gated community in New York, but this was in the 1950s, an era when housing was far more accessible to average families, and the neighborhood was generally considered middle class. His mother worked as a teacher's aide. His father was employed as a groundskeeper for the city's Parks and Recreation Department. That background alone was not going to open doors to the circles that would later populate his infamous address books. By most accounts, he was a bright student. He skipped grades, tutored classmates for extra income, and eventually enrolled at NYU to study mathematical physiology, a rigorous and respected field even at the time. However, he never completed the degree. History, of course, includes many influential college dropouts. In fact, several of them will be mentioned later in this video. But unlike those individuals, Epstein did not create a groundbreaking company, a transformative product, or any obvious achievement that would have set him apart from other ambitious students who left university early. So he didn't benefit from powerful family ties, and he didn't launch a breakout company that instantly elevated him into elite circles. That leaves only one path, climbing the ladder the old-fashioned way, step by step, leveraging whatever opportunities appeared. One of the earliest mysteries in Epstein's rise was how he secured a teaching position at the prestigious Dalton School, an elite private high school, despite lacking the formal credentials typically required. We've already covered the mechanics of how he accumulated his wealth in a separate video. This time, the focus is on how he built his network. Still, that first job matters because it played a significant role in both narratives. It marked his first indirect proximity to individuals connected to historical significance. Shortly before Epstein began teaching there, the school's headmaster had been Donald Barr. During World War II, Barr had served as an officer in the Office of Strategic Services, the organization that later evolved into the CIA. An unsettling detail often mentioned is that Barr once authored a science fiction novel titled Space Relations, which depicted a planet governed by oligarchs engaging in conduct disturbingly similar to the crimes Epstein would later be convicted of. If this were fiction, that level of irony might be criticized as heavy-handed. Unfortunately, it unfolded in real life. Donald Barr was also the father of Bill Barr, who would eventually serve as Attorney General under both George H.W. Bush and the first Trump administration. For obvious reasons, many people attempt to draw a straight line from that point forward. But in fairness, the link is not particularly solid. Donald Barr had already left Dalton 3 months before Epstein was hired, and there's no concrete evidence suggesting he influenced the hiring of a math instructor. What we do know is that during his short tenure as a teacher, Epstein made a deliberate effort to ingratiate himself with the parents of the affluent students in his classes. One former student, Lynn Koppel, later recalled that Epstein persuaded a parent to recommend him to her father, Alan Greenberg, who at the time was the CEO of Bear Stearns. Most people don't attend parent-teacher conferences expecting them to turn into networking opportunities, much less job interviews. Yet somehow that strategy worked. After being dismissed from Dalton, Epstein secured a position at Bear Stearns, one of the most respected financial firms on Wall Street. The takeaway here is that even in his early 20s, without major accomplishments to his name, he demonstrated a willingness, some might say audacity, to extract maximum value from every connection he could access. His time at Bear Stearns provided him with credibility and exposure to high-profile clients. It also rewarded his habit of reaching outward, building relationships, and positioning himself socially. In the 1970s, entertaining clients, hosting dinners, arranging experiences, ensuring they felt valued, was simply part of the culture in high finance. Viewed in isolation, this seems entirely logical. An ambitious young financier cultivating professional relationships with wealthy individuals who might direct business his way. If you strip away the criminal context, it resembles textbook networking. But none of this occurred in a vacuum, and it certainly doesn't explain how he later found himself entangled in geopolitical controversies, connected to international spiritual figures, embedded within academic circles, or brushing up against the early development of modern surveillance infrastructures. To understand that, we need to examine how influence compounds and how certain environments accelerate that process. Much of what we explore on this channel revolves around identifying patterns beneath the headlines, incentives, systems, feedback loops, and especially forces that grow exponentially over time. That's one reason I've been using Brilliant recently, and they're sponsoring this week's video. Brilliant is built around developing genuine problem-solving ability. It focuses on math and computer science, guiding you toward deep comprehension rather than surface-level familiarity. Concepts that once felt abstract or confusing start to become intuitive. What sets Brilliant apart is its active approach. You're not just watching explanations or memorizing procedures. You're constantly engaging with interactive visual challenges that require you to reason through the material yourself. I've been working through their course on exponential functions, and what stood out to me is how it develops intuition. Instead of simply plugging numbers into equations, you begin to understand how small inputs can compound dramatically over time, and why exponential growth patterns appear in everything from finance to technology to social systems. It also responds to your progress in real time. As you move through the material, Brilliant adjusts the difficulty level, provides focused practice where you need it most, and reinforces concepts through targeted review. The result is steady improvement and growing confidence as your understanding becomes more solid. To try Brilliant free for 30 days, Visit brilliant.org/howmanyworks, scan the QR code on your screen, or use the link in the description. On top of that, Brilliant is offering our viewers 20% off an annual premium subscription, which gives you unlimited daily access to everything on the platform. Now, when it comes to Epstein's connections, particularly the powerful individuals he seemed to encounter in strange places and under unusual circumstances, it becomes very easy for any discussion to slide into full-blown conspiracy territory. The truth is, we still lack critical details about events like the inner workings of the Aryan Chandra affair, the exact nature of his meetings with various heads of state, and even, for that matter, the precise mechanics of how he accumulated much of his wealth. There's a thin and difficult line between reasonably extrapolating from incomplete evidence and constructing elaborate conspiracy narratives. And navigating that line is made far more challenging by the uncomfortable reality that the available information remains deeply incomplete. Certain theories, such as the claim that he functioned as a compromised intelligence asset, do appear to align with some known facts. But alignment is not proof, and the simple truth is that we do not have enough verified data to draw definitive conclusions. This uncertainty matters for two important reasons. First, it directly relates to how he assembled such a vast web of contacts. Much of what he did, at least on the surface, was not especially unusual. Early in his career, his aggressive networking was largely indistinguishable from the behavior of any ambitious financier trying to climb the ranks. By most accounts, from individuals who are not merely attempting to distance themselves in hindsight, he possessed strong social skills and had a talent for making others feel valued and significant. As his network expanded, he made a strategic decision not to confine himself solely to financial circles. Instead of remaining within the ecosystem of bankers and clients, he deliberately broadened his social reach. He cultivated relationships outside that bubble as well. Later, this diversity would serve his criminal enterprise, but at the time, it also positioned him as someone who knew a guy for almost any situation. Based on the compiled data so far, there have been 107,000 documented interactions among 19,000 individuals named in the files, with Epstein positioned at the center. This mapping comes from the team behind the Epstein network visualization, which I'll link in the description. He acted as a connector. He could introduce academics with prestige, but limited funding to wealthy individuals eager to acquire intellectual credibility. He could facilitate conversations between overseas contacts exploring new markets. Often, it was as simple as strategic name-dropping, using one relationship to impress and draw in another. According to journalist and media consultant Michael Wolff, who worked closely with Epstein in the early 2000s, Epstein frequently attended TED conferences. His goal wasn't passive learning, it was recruitment. He sought out speakers with compelling ideas, individuals he could later showcase at private gatherings for his affluent associates. So if you ever thought TED Talks couldn't become more self-referential, well, here we are. He approached networking as a full-time occupation. Being the person who could connect anyone to anyone else became central to his identity. Unfortunately, over time, that same connective power extended to linking predators with victims. As his wealth increased and his reputation within elite circles grew, his network began to compound. Access generated more access. Visibility led to greater visibility. There exists what's often described as the billionaire social calendar, a recurring circuit of exclusive events throughout the year that a relatively small group of high-profile individuals move through almost nomadically. People overwhelmingly socialize within their own economic tier. At the highest levels of wealth, there are only a few hundred individuals worldwide who truly share comparable lifestyles and experiences. As a result, they circulate among the same conferences, galas, retreats, and private gatherings, knowing they'll encounter familiar peers. Wendover Productions created an excellent breakdown of the logistics behind this phenomenon, unsurprisingly, and I'll link that below as well. The key point for understanding Epstein's network is this. At that level, the total pool of participants is surprisingly small. It may seem as though he knew everyone, but in reality, there simply aren't that many people operating in those rarefied circles. After his 2008 conviction, however, that network suffered visible strain. Unsurprisingly, many individuals were reluctant to be publicly associated with someone whose name had become synonymous with criminal scandal. But according to multiple reports, he managed to rebuild much of that network after 2008 by leaning on individuals willing to publicly vouch for him as someone who had changed. Beyond the horrific crimes that understandably dominate the headlines, another source of public frustration emerging from these files is the unmistakable sense that this is a tightly knit circle that protects its own. When figures as ideologically opposed as Steve Bannon and Noam Chomsky appear only 1 degree removed from each other, it illustrates something revealing. At the very highest levels, fundamental political disagreements can resemble casual rivalries, more like arguing over sports teams than battling over principles. No matter which faction prevails in the broader political arena, their personal circumstances remain largely untouched. For many within that stratosphere, the stakes simply aren't the same. While this dynamic may not surprise you personally, the renewed public focus on these crimes is also casting a spotlight on how insulated and interconnected these relationships really are. The final observable pattern from the material currently available is that Epstein was relentlessly online. Even within the limited set of released documents, it's clear he received tens of thousands of messages and responded to a remarkable number of them with notable consistency. After reviewing thousands of emails ourselves, one somewhat unsatisfying and frankly sobering realization stands out. Among these elites, Epstein was popular largely because he was perceived as a peer who actually engaged with them in a direct, informal way. Without venturing into amateur psychological analysis, most of the communications that have been made public revolve around surprisingly mundane topics: business proposals, weak humor, casual introductions, everyday logistics. It's far less cinematic than many might imagine. For Epstein, however, these routine exchanges were part of a larger system. Through a combination of social leverage and, reportedly, an undisclosed degree of blackmail, he converted relationships into financial arrangements. Those financial arrangements funded a lavish lifestyle, which in turn expanded his access to even more influential individuals. As discussed in a previous video, the majority of his wealth appears to have come from unusually large fees paid by a relatively small number of clients who, for reasons still unclear, preferred him over more conventional financial managers. An obvious consequence of such an expansive network is that many people connected to him were likely not participants in his criminal activities. That is precisely what many individuals are now emphasizing. Yet this leads to a deeper question, one that can be illustrated with a specific example. Yes, my name appears in the Epstein files. At first glance, that doesn't look great. Without additional context, it appears troubling. However, when you examine what can be unredacted, the reality is far less dramatic. It turns out to be part of an email exchange between Epstein and an unidentified sender discussing work as a film industry producer. One line suggests that understanding money is essential in that field, which admittedly might require me to reconsider this channel's tagline. There's also a small but noteworthy detail in that same exchange. Epstein remarked that before learning how money works, one must first learn to read and write. After collectively spending hundreds of hours reviewing his correspondence, this comment stood out for a different reason. Many of his emails, and those of the highly influential individuals he communicated with, were riddled with errors and written in a way that could generously be described as barely literate. Some messages genuinely looked as though the keyboard had been mashed at random before hitting send. Now, this example is admittedly trivial, but it illustrates an important point. Without proper context, isolated snippets can easily be shaped into narratives that appear far more sinister than reality. Which raises a difficult question. Why aren't individuals who are mentioned only tangentially in these documents demanding the full release of information to clarify their involvement and protect their reputations? The straightforward answer is that some people may indeed have something serious to hide. For them, ambiguity is preferable. But for others, the hesitation could be far more mundane. Publicly pushing for transparency might expose friends, business partners, or clients. As these documents reveal, this is an exclusive circle capable of delivering prestige, financial opportunity, and access. For many within it, remaining inside that circle may feel more valuable than pursuing accountability. Of course, future disclosures could substantially alter our understanding of all this. But if you want a clearer picture of how valuable those connections ultimately were, watch the next video, where we break down how Epstein accumulated his fortune despite having relatively few traditional qualifications. And as always, like and subscribe if you want to keep learning how money works. If you want more videos breaking down stories like this, make sure to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.